Okay, so people are apparently a little upset about this new Nike ad.
I have all of these socks now that have holes right at the ankle part.
Because you had to cut the swooshes out?
I had to cut the swooshes out.
Okay, you're an idiot.
Oh. I'm protesting?
Not really. See, here's the thing that people who are trying to protest Nike don't understand. You already bought this shit. Like, you already gave them your money.
Right.
You know, and I think it's hysterical. And this happened with the Dixie Chicks CDs, right? They would like steamroll those.
After they bought them.
They already have your money. You're not taking their money away from them by, steamrolling a CD you already own. Nike, like, let's destroy all these clothes. You've already bought them. And guess what? Nike stock is going up because they're getting all this. The stock went down, but the sales went way up because people who like the ad are now going out and buying Nikes to support the ad. And people who don't like the ad are burning shoes they've already. And did you see the thing on Twitter about how somebody decided to burn the shoes without taking them off of his feet?
Oh, that sounds like Snopes.
I need to look it up. The one about the guy who burned his house down was definitely Snopes. A fake.
Yep.
There was another one where somebody like showed up in the hospital and had burnt feet because he thought it would be cute to like try to burn the shoes before he took them off. These are not the greatest minds of the Western world, is all I'm saying.
Just do it.
Attention. Pop surgeons Eric and Stacey, please report to operating room 1. Pop surgeons Eric and Stacey, please report to operating room 1. Surgery is about to begin.
This is Poperation. I'm Stacey.
I am Eric, and this week we are talking about a Broadway musical that turns 60 years old. Well, the film.
The film is 60.
Is 60 years old.
And the play itself is 69. So it's almost 70 years old. But we're talking about the movie South Pacific.
Musical by Rodgers and Hammerstein.
And story, the book by Joshua Logan. He also directed it. 1958 is when it came out.
So Rodgers and Hammerstein, also well known for Oklahoma, Carousel, The King and I,
Cinderella.
Oh yeah, that one too. Yeah, saw that on Broadway recently.
They were, I think, along with who else was there? The Berlin Gershwins,
Lerner and Lowe.
Lerner and Lowe.
I feel like Lerner and Lowe and Rodgers and Hammerstein kind of were that golden age of Broadway, the good old fashioned chestnut Broadway musical.
Yeah, they totally brought it to this different plane from where it was kind of, at one point, wasn't it kind of like, it's a little better than vaudeville. And then they took it to that next level to where Broadway became that thing that people talk about in golden letters, when they're talking about it, in big capital, beautiful letters.
Yeah. Oklahoma, ! Seems to be the show that everyone says changed the Broadway musical forever. And what they meant by that is that there was both a book and a score, and there would be talking and there would be scenes, and it would seem very much like a play. And then all of a sudden the orchestra would kick in and they'd start singing. And the other main thing is that the songs carried the story forward. There were things happening in the songs. It's not like the story just stopped and now we'll sing.
Because a lot of times the songs were maybe what they were thinking. So that's nothing that you would have a dialogue about. But, what was it? Is it in Oklahoma? I'm just a girl who can't say no. I don't know. Maybe you tell your best friend that, which she kind of was in that scene.
Yeah.
But it's songs that would talk about where the character was and would then also possibly color what the decisions that they were going to make.
Yeah. Little side note, we will not go down this rabbit hole, but, there is a production right now happening at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. The Rodgers and Hammerstein estate has agreed to Oklahoma with same-sex couples. So Curly and Lori are a lesbian couple, and Will and Ado Andy are the guys. And so he's just a boy who can't say no. Ooh. I've met that boy before. Anyway.
Wow. Okay. Didn't know that was happening.
Yeah. And it's the first time that estate has ever agreed for their stuff to be altered like that in any kind of way. So it's big. I mean, who knows what's going to happen now with Rodgers and Hammerstein?
So basically, James Michener, which, people have to know his name. He's like a classic in, if not literature, popular books.
My dad read all those books.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
And they're huge. But this is the beginning.
Successful and also very large.
Seriously, 8,000 pages. But this was the beginning of his career. This actually helped his career. But he had written a Pulitzer Prize winning book in 1947 called Tales of the South Pacific. So this movie basically the play initially pulled several stories from this book of tales, kind of like the Canterbury Tales, and where you don't necessarily you can pull them out and their stories
like a
on
book
their
of
own.
short stories.
Correct. Yeah. And so basically, Rodgers and Hammerstein thought that some of these tales would do well together, and that's what they did. They mixed and matched.
But what they did is they really pulled on one theme in particular, which is that of race. Because Michener wasn't, he addressed racism a lot in this book, but he also talked about a lot of other things. And the book is not necessarily a polemic on racism, although South Pacific really is a very strong statement about racism in particular.
Well, what Rodgers and Hammerstein, they were looking at, can we have a successful musical, a successful show, and also say something serious about society? And the racism was very important to them as far as ending it, not keeping it. I should probably be clear. And so that's what they decided. They decided because there were several stories that had these ribbons of racism in it, and they pulled those. And with Joshua Logan helped write the book of it, created this musical that went to Broadway, and it's about World War II, and it's
which
interesting.
Wasn't that far away.
In 1949 and 47 is when the book came out, because Michener had been stationed there and had learned a lot about it, and that's what prompted him to write these stories. But you're right. So 47, the book they do the book. That's, what is that, 2 years after it's over, and then the musical hits Broadway 2 years after that.
Yeah, nobody who went to see that musical in its first run in Broadway, they all remembered the war from their own personal experience. They all lived through it.
4 years before. And I think that's important. And I think it's important even in the 1958 movie, which is what we're going to talk about. In that, I think it really needs to be remembered that this is post World War II. Because I think that colors it. What was interesting about watching this, and one reason we were talking about this is, again, it does have an anniversary this year, which is a big anniversary. But it's also the theme of racism, and we've talked about this in some of the old movies that we've talked about and reviewed, is that it's been going on forever, obviously, and art was talking about it all the time. Some, not nearly, but it's different. Each decade, each generation is able to attack it in a different way. And this is the way that Rodgers and Hammerstein were able to. And it's interesting because it was a bumpy road. But Mary Martin was the original on the play, but she was a little old to do it 12 years later. Although
they were going to use her, they had every intention of using her, and her co-star, whose name escapes me at the moment, who made a huge splash on the Broadway stage in the original production. I believe Enzo, is that his first name? He died right before the movie was about to be made, and so when it couldn't be the two of them together, they decided to just kind of open up the casting to see who else would be available to do this. They ended up casting Mitzi Gaynor in the movie, and I think they made a good choice. I think so. Their lead. So there's several different plot points that we'll get to later, but you had the big romance was between a French farmer. A plantation owner. Let's just there's a plantation owner, and this nurse, this American nurse, and Nellie Forbush. So there's Emile Debec and Nellie Forbush. Rossana Brazzi. Yes, you heard me right. It's an Italian name. He's Italian.
but he apparently was just as fluent in French as he was in Italian.
Yes.
But he played Emile Debec in the movie. Interestingly enough, Fernando Lamas was considered, but he couldn't get out of his contract.
He was doing a Broadway show at the time.
The name of that show was called Happy Hunting. Have you ever heard of that?
Never. I mean, there are so many.
That sounds like a fake name. It sounds like a fake name that you'd hear in one of those 1940s shows where, like, we're doing a show and it's called Happy Hunting.
Look, go to Broadway.com right now. Look at all the stuff that's on stage at the moment. At least 3 of these are going to be footnotes in history that no one will ever remember were ever there.
That's probably true.
Yeah.
But anyway, so Fernando Lamas, which would have been very interesting, also not French, but, I love Fernando Lamas. And I don't know. I'm torn on this.
Yeah, this guy Brazzi. I mean, I didn't really know him from much of anything else. I don't know that I've ever seen him do anything besides this.
Well, he's not a singer. He was dubbed, just FYI.
Well, he believes he is a singer, and he was actually not happy about the fact that he was dubbed. Apparently, he can sing, but not with quite the dulcet tones that Emile Debec sings with in this particular movie. Mitzi Gaynor and Ray Walston, who we'll talk about in a minute, are the only people in this movie who weren't dubbed. Everyone else.
Which is weird because, so Juanita Hall, who plays Bloody Mary, and we'll talk about the character a little later, which is a Polynesian woman. She is a native there, is Bloody Mary. Juanita Hall did play her on Broadway.
Yep.
But she wanted to be dubbed.
Apparently, she couldn't hit the high notes with as much confidence as she could before. I think 900 performances of singing Bali Hai wrecked her voice a little bit.
Yeah.
So she was dubbed by the woman who played Bloody Mary in the London production, who, interestingly, is an African-American woman.
Well, I think that, yes.
And I say interestingly because I should codify that. I think that this film came out, and Rodgers and Hammerstein were interested. I think they loved the story. I think if you're going to commit this much time to doing it, they were willing to invest a lot of work on this particular story. They liked it. They saw some potential there. They wanted to address racism. What was happening in 1950 back home? Clearly, the story of the day around racism was about white Americans and African Americans. That was the racial tension, which is still, one of the primary sources of racial tension in 2018. I don't think Rodgers and Hammerstein wanted to do a show about black people and white people. So I think that they had this other, setting that they were able to explore these issues of race and perhaps have people see it in a different way and then go, oh, they're talking about us.
Keep
I didn't
in mind,
think they were talking about us, but they are.
One of the goals was to have a successful musical. And I think that the idea was, let's try to work our way subtly into black and white, that, as opposed to, and so they went kind of to shades of brown.
But the song about racism, which we'll talk about a little later, makes no mention of the race or even the difference that you're talking about.
Right.
It is just, and it's a very pointed song for anyone who's listening in 1950 America to really hear that and go, oh, they're talking about us.
And we'll get to that and some of the reactions. So Mitzi Gaynor was hired, but all of the big women singers of the day were thought about. Judy Garland, your girl Judy Garland. Elizabeth Taylor, can you imagine?
She couldn't sing, so her screen test did not go well.
Else. Doris Day.
Okay.
Audrey Hepburn, who ended up being dubbed in My Fair Lady. And Ginger Rogers, who I think at this point was too old.
Yeah. And that's why I look at Nellie and think it's probably a good thing that Mary Martin didn't end up doing this. One of the reasons why Mitzi Gaynor works so well for me in this is that Nellie, I think, has to be young in order for you to stick with her through this story. There was a 2001 television movie that they made of South Pacific where they cast Glenn Close as Nellie Forbush. And I saw it, and parts of it were really good, but the other parts I was like, Nellie, you should have thought of this before. And the other thing, being a Navy kid, she's an ensign. Okay, if you're still an ensign in your 40s, something is wrong with your naval career. And so that's, so it clearly she's supposed to be a young woman.
Yeah, and I think that it supports the naivete that we'll talk about as well.
I don't know how old was Judy when this was going on? She was significantly older.
She was too old as well.
But I tell you, Judy 40s. In her prime could have been a wonderful
10, 12 years before. 10,
Probably,
12 years before.
Yeah.
She'd have been fine.
How about Doris? Doris Day would have been... She was younger at this point because she was younger, and I don't remember what the reason was. There was a reason. All of those. Anyway, she would have been lovely too.
So John Kerr plays Lieutenant Cable.
John Kerr, probably best known at this point. Have you ever seen Tea and Sympathy?
Yeah.
So he's the young Nellie kid in Tea and Sympathy with Deborah Carr.
Oh, right.
Right. And so Tea and Sympathy should be, if you watch this, I mean, it's hysterical to watch today because it's clearly a story about a young gay boy at a macho prep school for boys. Of course, they didn't have the courage to really tell that story. So they just make him kind of effeminate. And then he has a torrid affair with the headmaster's wife, which is ridiculous. It's so stupid. But anyway, he was this kid who couldn't catch a baseball in Tea and Sympathy, and then 2 years later he shows up in South Pacific.
He did some acting after this, and then I think he became a lawyer.
Really?
Yeah. So he went with that. Ray Walston plays Luther Billis, who is the CB who is always looking for a way to make a buck.
Uh-huh.
And he deals with Bloody Mary a lot. Juanita Hall, as I said, Bloody Mary is a native, kind of this very maternal figure, but she's a little bit of a cliche. You're native, almost not quite voodoo queen, but she knows everything. She knows where everybody is. She knows all the skeletons.
She's a wheeler dealer.
And then France Nguyen played Liat, who was Bloody Mary's daughter and the love interest of John Kerr, Lieutenant Cable.
So a few fun facts about France Nguyen. She didn't speak English either.
Correct.
So Liat didn't speak English, neither did she. She did speak French. And so she and Mr. Bratzi had conversations on set, and he would sometimes translate for her when she needed to get some direction. She showed up years later as one of the mothers in the Joy Luck Club.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Did not know that. So that's our...
She learned English by that point.
Well, I would hope so if you want to move on in Hollywood. So that is a little bit of the backstory. That is the cast. And in a minute, we're going to talk about the plot. Have all of these characters out in where? The South Pacific.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the plot and what's kind of going on here. First thing we meet is Lieutenant Cable shows up, which is interesting because when I was doing my requisite little bit of research for this, one of the main changes they made in making the movie is that the first scene of the play is now the second scene of the movie, and the second scene of the play is now the first scene of the movie. So we actually meet Lieutenant Cable and all the Seabees way before we meet Emile DeBeck and Nellie Forbush, or at least before we get to know her well.
What they're setting up is that this is going on in the middle of World War II, so that there is war going on. And maybe to keep the husbands who were dragged to the musical, to keep their attention going, that, by the way, it's a war movie.
Well, the first thing you see in the play is actually Emile's children, which are a crucial plot point more than they are really fully fleshed out characters. Little boy, little girl of Polynesian descent. The very first thing you see in the play is these two children singing this little French song.
Right.
And it's very cute. And you're like, what's happening here? South Pacific, they're singing in French. What's happening? And then it opens up on Emile DeBeck having lunch with Nellie Forbush.
But in the movie, which is what we're talking about, it opens with this Lieutenant Cable. And another reason to do it this way is you get some of the exposition out. because we have the pilot of this plane flying Lieutenant Cable into this particular island that the Allies have. We're able to understand what's going on. At one point he does this little trick where he says, the Japanese are on that island. They've got that one all covered, and they're, they're flying, and Cable's like, oh, okay, whatever. And he says, oh, well, let me show you. And he does this like buzz over, and all of the Japanese start shooting at him, missing, of course, because that would really shorten this movie
short. Yeah.
But again, I think all of that was to let the audience know there's a war going on. We haven't necessarily won it yet. And this guy is coming in on this mission that we don't know anything about, but we know it's a little bit secret because he won't even tell the pilot.
Mm-hmm.
And so he lands and he gets down and, with the Seabees, which are all of the sailors there that have been there for quite a while.
Yes,
they're very comfortable.
Yep.
And so we get a little
shirtless too.
They're very shirtless. My daughter's watching it. Teenagers are like, why does no one have a good shirt? And I can't answer you that. I can't.
Why do they all have such great chests?
I will also say my daughters in 2018 watching it said, I'll be honest, Mommy, they all look like they might be gay.
Well,
and
they're dancing with each other. And the whole point is there's no girls around,
exactly.
Which the first number of the movie, not the first number of the Broadway show, interestingly, but the first big number of the movie is There Is Nothing Like a Dame.
Yes.
They all want to hang around with women, but all of the women have been taken to another island to protect them from all the sailors. Probably
Correct.
For good reason.
Right. The nurses are kept at a distant place. And so we get a lot of exposition here as well, because Billis, Luther Billis, the Ray Walston character, lets Lieutenant Cable know what's going on. He then also meets Bloody Mary for the first time.
And Bloody Mary likes Lieutenant Cable.
Oh, she thinks he's very, very sexy, she calls him.
She also recognizes that he's an officer and probably has a lot more money than any of the, other boys that she's used to talking to.
And she has her daughter, Liat, that what we find out is that she basically, she's looking for a rich white man, and white is important for her daughter to marry.
Yep.
So here are our plot points so far. So Cable is there. Lieutenant Cable is there on a mission. And basically we find out to scout Japanese maneuvers, and Lieutenant Cable and Liat have this weird they're going to have a romance going on. Billis is there trying to make money.
Yep.
He's trying he makes grass skirts to sell to tourists and all of this stuff.
He does Nellie Forbush's laundry for her.
He does. So he's a seamstress. I don't know.
Tailor. Let's say he's a tailor. Seamstress.
I know.
No wonder they seem gay if you keep calling them seamstresses.
What's the male version of a seamstress? Tailor. Oh, my bad. And then the other big plot point is Nellie and Emile Debec, who, as I said, is this French plantation owner there on the other side of the island. There is their romance. So those are the four big plot points going on. And through, basically you're going through song after song after song, going toward getting through all of these different plots.
But the theme kind of comes through. So let's talk about how this kind of works. In the Liat Lieutenant Cable storyline, Liat speaks no English. He goes to Bali Hai, kind of the magical island where all the local women have been shuttered away from all of the American servicemen.
Correct.
The nurses are all officers, so the idea is they wouldn't have any interest in the enlisted men anyway. Only the other officers might be able to get a date with one of the nurses. And so all the enlisted men really want to go to Bali Hai. So Billis basically convinces Lieutenant Cable to go because Cable, as an officer, can charter a boat and Billis can tag along.
Enlisted men are not allowed to go to Bali Hai. They're not allowed to charter a boat to go to Bali Hai.
Right.
You can only...
So Lieutenant Cable does this. They arrive on the island, and immediately Bloody Mary sees Lieutenant Cable and says, "Come with me," and introduces her to, at the time, we don't know who she is, this young Polynesian girl, and Bloody Mary just leaves them alone, where one assumes they just take off all their clothes and have sex because they can't talk. I mean, it just and it becomes this very steamy love scene that the movie tastefully does a fade out and then a fade back in at what we assume is post-coital bliss. And in that scene, you find out that Liat is in fact Bloody Mary's daughter. And I honestly, you know, and I knew that because I knew a little bit about the story, but you're like, are we led to believe that she's just basically a prostitute? And then, because he's shocked to learn that, oh my gosh, this is your mother. He was under the impression.
Well, what was weird about that, I'll be honest, is that we were sitting there watching and Bloody Mary says, isn't she sweet? Isn't she the greatest daughter? And it was after that he's go, wait, this is your mother? And I'm thinking, dude, if you were listening to anything Bloody Mary said.
Well, he said she really is your mother. And I thought, I think he just assumed that she was the mom the way that the madam of a whorehouse is mom possible to all the girls. But yeah, I mean, basically she's pimping out her daughter so that she can nab a rich husband.
Well, what she says as soon as she goes down, you know, to the rest of the people after she's left them, she's like, that's going to be my new son-in-law.
Yeah.
Now, he doesn't hear her say that, but, you know, we all as an audience are going, oh, interesting. Yeah. Because we also have heard him say that he has a girlfriend back in Philadelphia.
Yeah. So she must know some magic stuff to do in that bedroom as a 16-year-old girl is being pimped out by her mother.
Right. And again, so she's, and what Bloody Mary makes, she does say, she says, she is not French. She speaks French, but she is not French. She is Tonkinese.
And aren't we pretty?
And aren't we a pretty people?
Yep.
So that tells you that okay, so there's that.
So what happens in that though, the kind of the plot crux of that is that while Lieutenant Cable is scare quotes in love with Liat, who he cannot have a conversation with. So let's just talk about the ridiculousness of that. But he still feels like he cannot marry her, and the reason is race. He just cannot bring
at this
a
point
Polynesian
in the plot,
girl home.
At this point in the plot, it's not even occurred to him. Because at this point, he's just having this love affair. He's having this fling with this beautiful woman that he's in love with.
But when it becomes very clear that Bloody Mary wants, but that's kind of what I'm getting toward is like, this is where the movie addresses race in this story.
In this story. And
he can't marry her because she's brown.
And also, I think it's important to say that Nellie and Lieutenant Cable, which, by the way, Bloody Mary can't say lieutenant, apparently. So he's Lieutenant.
Mm-hmm.
So Lieutenant is what he's called the whole time. And, of course, that's what you want to call him after that, just because it's ridiculous. But, again, there were a lot of cliches in this. Again, we'll address that. But that Nellie and Lieutenant were friends. We saw them establish a friendship. So they talk to each other about these love affairs that they're having. In the meantime, Nellie has met this French plantation owner, Emile,
who seems fantastic.
He's handsome.
Way too old for her, but otherwise great.
Correct. He is older, but she even says, you know, my mother said that an older man is good for young girls. And of course, I'm cringing as I'm watching this in 2018.
Don't listen, girls.
Oh, dear God. But anyway, that's going on. And keep in mind, you also made the comment that Lieutenant is, you know, he's in his mid-20s. He's in his mid-20s. And little Liat is about 15, 16, something like that.
Yep.
So we have huge age differentials in both romances. But
so throughout the first act, or the first half of the movie, the first act of the play, the romance between Nellie and Emile seems to be going swimmingly. Like, what's the problem? They've fallen in love. They're going to get married. There's a little bump in the road where she thinks, oh, my superior officers are interested in him. I wonder if there's something politically that I should know about. And once she clears that up, and no, he's just this great freedom-loving, you know, he's French, but he seems like a great guy. She's all for it until she meets his children.
Well, these two little children come up. He says, oh, come on up here, little thing one, thing two. I don't remember their names. Mm-hmm. And they come up and they're talking. She says, oh, they're adorable. Are they your butler's kids? And he said, no, they're mine. And
she thinks he's joking.
And she's like, right. And she said, so where is this wife of yours? And he said, well, she's dead. And her face, she just blanches out, and she's like, oh.
And she was going to spend the night, which, by the way, Scandalous.
Well, she was going to stay later. He said, you can sneak back.
He wanted her to spend the night.
Of course he did, but I don't think she was going to. She's from Arkansas.
Okay.
The way they portrayed her, I think she was just going to stay later.
Even nice girls stay the night in 1950. Anyway, she can't get out of there fast enough. She's
like, I gotta go.
And what I will say that I did appreciate about this movie that I didn't expect to is that when later on in the film he does confront her about this and says, she admits, I don't have a good reason why I can't be with you. This is a bad reason. But she insists that this was born in me.
Right.
This idea that I cannot accept the fact that your wife
I can't be
Polynesian.
with you. I can't be with you because you have had
a brown
children.
woman.
Right.
And she didn't even mind the kids. She's like, the fact that his wife was brown is the fact that she can't
he had
deal
been with. Yep.
Which makes it difficult, when she and Lieutenant Cable are commiserating with each other about how tragic their lives are because, these brown people have inflicted themselves upon their hearts. It's kind of hard to empathize with them, in this. And yet you do, because both of them feel terrible about it and both of them know it's wrong. And I think that's the only thing that I can kind of stick to. I can stick with Mitzi Gaynor as Nellie Forbush because she knows it's wrong. She's distraught more at herself than anybody else. She knows that this guy, Emile Debec, is fantastic and there's nothing wrong with him. She can't bring herself to do it. She thinks it's inborn. And then, of course, when Emile Debec says to Lieutenant Cable later, I don't believe her when she says it's inborn, that's when the song happens.
So that's what's going on. Those are the plot points. That's what's happening. And, in the end, she and Emile do end up together. That is the last scene. So just spoiler alert. But what didn't work with this movie in 2018?
A lot.
Because keep in mind,
you should see it. People should see it.
Well,
it's dated.
Right,
it's
keep in mind the point that Rogers and Hammerstein were trying to make. It was an anti-racism point, and so there are parts of it that they did really well. But what didn't work well for this particular movie? First of all, I will tell you the overture. We're watching it, and it's a black screen and nothing but music. And of course, it's the music from the show, but you don't know that if you've never seen it. And my daughters are like, what's going on? What's wrong with the TV? And I'm like,
I thought something was wrong with my TV too. Because usually movie musicals use that's where they have their credit sequence. So really there's two overtures. There's this 3.5 minute overture that you would kind of expect. If you go see an old-timey Broadway show, they're going to play an overture for the show. And the reason they do that is so by the time the songs are sung, they sound kind of familiar. They've already worked their way into your consciousness a little bit. When they're making the movie, they had this 3.5 hour orchestral treatment of all the hit songs. And then they had a credit sequence with another overture. I thought something was wrong with my TV too.
No, it was old school. And so it was a bit long. And I feel like you wouldn't make it this way. If you remade this movie, you don't have this 3 or 4 to 5 minute overture with just a blank screen.
Although I will say I don't think that's a fault of the movie. I would almost say that's a fault of a modern audience. Just sit and listen to the movie. I agree
with you that that's because of how audiences have evolved. I get that. But at the same time, you got to go with what your audience is going to tolerate.
I went to go see a Broadway show recently, and it was a revival of an old show. It was Hello, Dolly. And they started with the overture, and the two people in front of me thought it was still time to carry on a conversation. And the man next to him was not having it. And he told that it was this whole soap opera happening right in front of me because he was like, stop talking. The orchestra is playing. The show has started. And these people were also an older couple, but they were just so taken aback. And it was just like, sorry, I mean, he's being a bit of a pill, but I side with the guy who told you to shut up because the orchestra's playing. They're doing their job. It's time for you to be quiet.
And that's just, theatrical politeness. But people don't know that anymore. But that's another topic for another time. So interestingly enough, and you see this just early on, is colored filters on the lens. holy shit, it was like it was this new thing. Let's do it everywhere.
Now, what I read was Joshua Logan, the director, believed that this would be much more subtle than it ended up being. And he was rightly horrified when he saw the entire screen just turn red when Bloody Mary starts to sing Bali Hai, and the entire screen turned yellow when they were. I mean, it's awful.
Well, so why it even started, though, is that Logan was concerned that the beautifulness and lushness of the real tropics would just be great, because of course they're using Technicolor, which was kind of new.
Crazy what these kids are doing now with
but
their
he thought it would look
fancy finagled cameras.
He didn't think people would believe it was real, so he wanted to tone it down, and that's why the filters were there. But it looks like shite.
I really thought that the film had been damaged. I thought this was one of those things like A Star is Born. I did. I kind of thought, well, gee, I wish I could see it the way that people originally saw it in 1958. And then I read, you are. This is how they watched it then, because it always looked this bad.
And,
it's dreadful.
And now, apparently, when at first he was a little concerned, but later on, in the end, his son said he was like, you know what? I still like it. So in the end, Joshua Logan was good with his
all that means is you can convince yourself of anything if you give yourself enough time. It's terrible.
It is. So if you can get past that, you're okay. But that was bad. You know, it's that 1950s stylized acting. Everybody had it, where there was a little bit more soap opera technique in there than we tolerate now. We just don't deal with that now. We see that, and it comes off as fake, and it comes off as you're working too hard.
And I think that if you commit to it, it can still kind of work. Mitzi worked for me in this movie. No one is more surprised by that than me. She didn't have much of a career after South Pacific. I looked at her IMDb list, and she stopped making movies about 3 or 4 years after South Pacific came out. And this was the biggest role she'd ever had. And I just kind of thought, wow. And she lived a lot longer than that.
She was adorable.
She was around.
She was absolutely adorable.
She could have had a really nice career. She sings beautifully. For playing the young ingenue, she emotes in a very lovely way.
She's also a very good dancer. And that surprised me. We didn't see as much dance numbers in this.
Yeah.
And again, you're on sand. I get it. But still.
And when you do see her dance, she's doing a soft shoe barefoot on top of a boat and those high kicks. And I was like, wow, Mitzi, you go. And Honey Bun is adorable. But yeah, she was great. And even her big dramatic scene where I referenced before that Emil kind of comes to her and says, but why, Nellie, why can't you be with me? And she just bursts into tears and says, I don't have a good reason. I just know that I can't. I was into it. Yes, it was a little overblown. It was a little 50s, but she committed to it. And that scene worked for me way better than I expected it to.
My point on this is really, you just got to, again, you just got to you got to push past it. And I thought she was adorable. No, I loved her. The cliche natives. I cringed so much when they get to Bali Hai and there's this big group of natives with the bones through their nose. I mean, it was, are you effing kidding me? It was like every set of King Kong.
Yeah, for a movie that wants to be a battle axe against racism, it sure indulged in a whole lot of racist tropes all by itself.
It was not, and again, if we go, maybe it was Rodgers and Hammerstein that were the whole racist thing, and Josh Logan was just along for the ride, so he didn't really, maybe, I don't know.
That, and also I think you introduce some of these racist cliches, and some white audiences go, oh, okay, this will be fun. Oh, look at all the natives, and then when they get hit with the message, maybe it was meant to kind of butter them up and get them into get the racist audience actually kind of into the story and kind of enjoying it.
Yeah.
You don't feel like you're about to be lectured to. And then when the hammer drops, it's like, oh.
And you know what? Those filters really worked.
No, they didn't.
Yeah, exactly what I'm saying with you. Cliche natives did not work either. I had a little bit of an issue with the women. But Nellie was adorable and I loved her, but she wasn't very bright. When she's sitting there talking to the officers and they're telling her, she's like, they're like, what do you know about Emil? And she says, well, I don't really know that much, do I? But they're asking her things, and the way she's answering, it's like, oh my God, are you a moron? Are you that big a moron? I had a problem with her. And then, of course, Liat, let's keep him dumb. Let's make sure she can't understand English.
Yeah, I mean,
she can't talk back.
Liat is bilingual, just not the language that's useful for her to talk to Lieutenant Cable with. So therefore, she's just an object of beauty and sexuality. And, you know, I mean, he has no problem sleeping with her, even though he can't understand a word she says and they can't converse.
But when you go to the idea of, and you put in love in quotes, are you in love with her or is this lust?
No.
Because you can't be in love with her.
You're in love with the idea of her.
And then later on, you know, at the end.
And part of the idea, quite frankly, is submissive young Asian girl.
Thank you. That is totally 100% what my point is. That it was just cliche, but I just didn't like that these are our heroines.
Well, I'll forgive Nellie a little bit in that if cast well, she's young. This is where I had a problem with Glenn Close playing this role. And every time they try to bring it back to Broadway and they want an established Broadway star, which usually means has a few years under her belt, to play Nellie Forbush, it's like, no, this is the role. First of all, South Pacific can sell itself. You don't need a big name.
At this point,
cast a big name as Emile. Cast a big name as Lieutenant Cable.
Yes.
Fine. Bring on your 21-year-old, fresh-faced unknown to play Nellie Forbush, and it can still work. But she's got to be young. Well,
and in this movie, they were young, and the men were considerably older, which I've already mentioned. That was a thing. Now, it's for Emile's character, it's important. In the story that James Michener wrote, the story that they pulled this romance from, it was called An Officer and a Gentleman. He didn't just have 2 children. He had 8 daughters out of wedlock with several women. So they cleaned it up quite a bit. Okay. They established early on that he had been married to this woman and she only had 2 kids.
Okay.
So anyway, but he needed to be older. Quick romance turnaround. Emile is asking her to marry him in 2 weeks.
Yep.
And I don't feel like more than 2 or 3 weeks at the end of it goes on between Cable and Liat, because he does change his mind right before he dies.
Yep.
But the song Happy Talk, I don't think that works. I remember growing up, we had all of the soundtracks to all of the musicals. And I listened to this soundtrack over and over and over again. And I loved this song. And I remember seeing the movie, and it was adorable. This, doing the little happy talk movement.
I have just lost all respect for you.
No. Wait for it. Understand, when I'm listening to it, I'm 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. And it was adorable because that's what the little girl, the Liat is a little girl singing this song, and it's appropriate for an 8-year-old to sing this song. It is not appropriate for her mother, who's whoring her out, and her to sing this song. I mean, it was awful. It was one of the most uncomfortable things I've ever seen.
Okay, so I was, as I often do when I'm watching movies that I know we're going to talk about on the show, I'm watching the movie and my phone is open to the IMDb page of the movie, so I can look up real quickly, who's this actor, who's the whatever, so I just know what I'm doing. I happened to, before the movie started, go to the Goofs page. And one of the goofs they mentioned is that Liat cannot speak English, and yet all of her hand gestures during Happy Talk convey that she knows what her mother is singing, and that's a goof. When I was watching it, to me, what was just very clear to me is that she's played these hand gestures with mom singing this song before. And I got this really creepy feeling like she's 15 years old. How many other Lieutenant Cables have there been?
Well, I don't.
Ew.
No.
Ew.
No. I don't know that I felt like there were other Lieutenants. But remember when he says, I can't marry your daughter at one point, Bloody Mary's like, then she's going to marry the other white French plantation owner kind of thing. So I think this is the first time she's been whored out as far as sex goes. But I think Bloody Mary's always had an eye out for the right white guy.
Yeah.
No, but I also think she taught. Oh, yes, most definitely she's been taught to do this. That was an awful. That song does not.
I hated it before I even saw the movie because it's juvenile and it's dumb.
Again, when I was 8, it was fine.
Okay, and I was kidding. But it also is now, not only is it juvenile and dumb, but in context, it's also highly disturbing.
It makes no sense in context.
Ugh.
It's like, okay, we aren't going to talk about anything real. Let's just talk about happy things so you can fall in love.
And they can't have a conversation, these two. So what is
that's
it all?
The joke. That's
exactly.
the joke in it. So then what happens is they dive into the water and they have sex under the water.
And it looks very Blue Lagoon, didn't it?
It looked really. How long can you hold your breath underwater? They did a lot of that. It was very much Blue Lagoon. It was very much Tarzan Planet of the Apes Lagoon. I mean, it was just, it was awful. Also, how everybody overcomes their racism. I had a little bit of problem with that. In the end, Lutellan finally realized basically goes on a suicide mission in order to have to not make a decision between the Philadelphia girl but he had decided before the suicide mission, I'm going to stay here. I'm not going to go back to Philadelphia.
Yeah, because he saw Nellie break down, and I think he realized how stupid it was.
Well, he heard her story, and she sounded like an idiot.
Yeah. And then he sang the song, which we'll talk about.
Yes. But I just felt like, wait a minute, what does it take for you to get over your racism? And then Nellie's goes out there and looks at the ocean at one point when she thinks that Emil might die. And she just starts singing to the ocean and the sunset. And I'm like, oh, well, your racism's cured. I just thought, I'm like, are you kidding? That's not how it happens. Well, there was no...
In Nellie's instance, I liked her story a little bit more than I liked Joe's. When she realized that he might be dead, she realized what a huge mistake she had made. Now, she sings to the ocean and the sunset because it's a musical, and that's kind of what, But I at least appreciated the fact that the stakes had to be pretty high for her to go, I really fucked up. And she did, because her reasons for not being with him, she should not be with him because he's old enough to be her father.
Thank you.
Not because he has two kids of his own who happen to be brown.
Right. And then I started laughing right at one point. You have all this romance, all this angst is going on. Okay. Then in Act 2, still a little bit more angst about what happened in Act 1. And then suddenly, oh, right. We've got a mission to do. It was like suddenly the movie remembered that it was a war going on.
And the play never really gets there, because the only thing you really get in the play is the voices coming over the radio from where the war is happening. At least you get some wartime-ish action sequences.
Well, and again, I think that was again for the husbands in the audience. It's like, oh, okay, well, at least
and you
something.
Can do it in a movie, so why not? Why wouldn't?
So
you?
that was kind of a little silly. And then what also didn't work for me was it was just extraordinarily simplistic. At the same time, I say that I also want to say it was post World War II, and in the 50s, that's exactly what was going on. Everything was this simplified, this beautiful, you call it, I think I'm using the word right, nice, lovely life that, was the American dream. And I think that that was part of what was going on, was simplify. But it's still, in 2018, it's hard.
And in 1958, I bet Rodgers and Hammerstein probably thought, by the time this movie is 60 years old, America will have solved the race thing. But I really do. They probably thought that, because social movements come and go. This is one that America has not solved. And so I think it doesn't age well, because we're watching this in 2018 going, we have not figured race out, not by a long shot. Yeah. In some ways, we've gone backwards. And so we know how complex it is. And so to see it just all tied up in a nice little bow doesn't really work. But I think that's just that has more to say about where we are than where Rodgers and Hammerstein were.
Well, that's probably true. So that's what didn't work. But there's a bunch that did work, and we'll talk about that in a minute.
We're going to take a break. We're going to talk about what we liked and the song.
Are talking South Pacific, Bali Hai.
That was lovely, by the way.
You know what? I have a lot of talents. Some are more hidden than others. So speaking of that, we're going to talk about what did work. And the biggest thing that works in this movie is the music, in my opinion.
Okay, fun fact. This is the only Rodgers and Hammerstein musical that was made into a movie where every single song from the play made it to the movie. They didn't cut a single song, which for the movie versions of these is rare because these Broadway musicals would go on for 3 hours and people were into it because they paid what they thought was a lot of money at the time to go see these shows, and people didn't mind sitting there for a long time.
Exactly, because also there was not the television stuff going on as much, and there's certainly, there was no internet or any of that. So this was a big thing of entertainment.
But they typically would trim down these musicals by a lot when they would make the shows, and they didn't cut a single song out of this because the soundtrack was so popular. Everyone knew every song, even though they hadn't seen the show, and they wanted to hear each one of them.
The cast album, which was recorded 10 days after the show opened, 69 weeks at number 1 on Billboard. 69 weeks at number 1, but a total of 400 weeks. How many years is that? 400 weeks on the charts. That is like 8 years on the charts. And it was the best-selling record of the 1940s. Yeah. Now, I say the original, that's the original cast from the Broadway show, not the movie.
Mary Martin.
But the music was amazing. And it's beautiful. Every song is lovely. And and as you said earlier, that what they did is that the songs push the plot forward. It gives you a little more insight to that character or what's going on, or it moves, everything to the next stage. I thought this was a beautiful cast.
Yes.
I think John Kerr, I don't know where he is on any kind of spectrum sexually, but he was beautiful to look at, I thought.
He was very wide-eyed and innocent in the ways that he needed to be in order to play this role. So I thought he was very well cast. He wasn't quite as studly as some of those men on the beach,
correct,
that you met before. And so, if you're an admirer of the male form, this might be your very favorite musical from the 1960s because there's a lot of male forms to go around, including even some sight gags. I mean, Luther Billis has that big, ship tattooed on his stomach. And when he kind of ripples his stomach, the whole ship goes.
And I remember that was something I remembered having watched it as a kid. I still remembered that. I mean, once you see it, you can't unsee it. That's
and then there's this really hot guy with a really low voice. His name is Stu Pot, and you know that because he's wearing a T-shirt that looks like it was made by a homicidal 8-year-old that says Stu Pot on it. His voice was dubbed by the same guy who did Tony the Tiger from the Frosted Flakes commercial. And if you know that when you listen to it, it's obvious.
Yeah.
Because you always have to cast to play Stu Pot. It's not a big role in terms of the plot at all, but there's always a Stu Pot in South Pacific, and he hits the lowest notes imaginable. Yeah. And he was and so they didn't have to pick the singer because they dubbed him. They just picked a really hot blonde giant of a man.
But Mitzi Gaynor is absolutely adorable. I mean, she couldn't have been more adorable.
Cute as a button.
Yeah, I thought she was perfectly cast. Liat is lovely. Just lovely. I mean, and Bloody Mary's right. They're beautiful people.
Yes. Well, Liat's prettier than Mary, but
so
Juanita had seen better days.
It was lovely to look at. The message, very controversial, especially at that time. But again, it's one of those where you're like, this is what art should sometimes do. If you can entertain and educate, then God love you, because and I think that they really tried. Their heart was in the right place. On the, we look at some of the cliches and that sort of thing that was on the what didn't work, but their heart was in the right. They were trying and making an effort, but they were fighting. I mean, there were politicians in the South were literally making legislation to keep the show from coming to their state.
And I thought it was a stroke of genius to frame the whole thing as anti-Polynesian racism, which was not the largest issue facing America of that time, but racism, particularly against African Americans, was huge. And so it was a way for you to kind of get into it. The audience walked in, saw some of these Polynesian characters, liked them. I mean, even though Bloody Mary is a walking cliche, you do kind of like her.
No, you do.
And then when the show becomes about your indifference towards this whole group of people based on the color of their skin is just stupid, every racist member of the audience has to go, oh, they're talking to me right now.
Well, I mean, the whole idea is that you like these characters and going, why on earth? What is keeping him from marrying her? What is that about? And wait.
And the other thing that I thought was interesting, a couple of the CBs during There Is Nothing Like a Dame, they had some black sailors in there. The military was not two. I saw two.
I only saw one. We were looking and there may
one
have been
was
two.
Prominently displayed, and there was one, and maybe he was the same person later on, but he was kind of in the background. The U.S. military was not integrated during World War II, and everyone in that audience would have known that.
Yes.
So it was just another thing to say, look, here's a virile black man without his shirt on either.
Correct.
And he's just mixing it up with all the boys. It's subtle to us, but not subtle to the people who are watching this the first time. That was very purposefully done.
A really nice choice, but it was brave because they were asked to, can you take down some of the racism? And they said no. Another thing they were asked to do was take out the song. You Have to Be Taught. That was a big issue, especially in the Deep South. Imagine.
When I thought about South Pacific before I saw this again, I did not like You Have to Be Carefully Taught. I thought it was so didactic. I thought, let's just hit us over the head with a hammer. By the way, this is the point of the show. And I usually hate it when that happens. In this case, I think the hammer was necessary for the audience they were trying to reach, and sadly still necessary for some people who are watching this today. And also, I thought it was set up well. I didn't quite remember the context, but you had this whole thing of Nellie saying, I know it's not right, but I can't help it. It's
I was
born in me.
Yep.
And when he rejects that and he looks at Lieutenant Cable and says, I don't believe it is born in you. And he says, it's not. And then he goes into You Have to Be Carefully Taught. And it made a lot more sense in context because it made sense for them to talk in platitudes and in inspirational quotes at that point.
I don't care to be hammered over the head and lectured either. But I also agree that I think because the story isn't about blacks and whites, it's about Polynesians and whites, that in order for it to go past the screen, you have to have some song or something in there to say, by the way, we're talking not just about Tonkinese and Americans. We're actually talking about all kinds of racism.
Yep. And the people that you want to put on the back of your buses.
Correct.
Yep.
And I think that's why, but I think it's a lovely song. I think that it is sung beautifully. I love the word. I love this song. It is one of my favorite songs from any musical. One reason is because of the message. The message is just spot on. But it's also, and when I was looking at doing, as we say, our minimum research for these shows, it was brave because it could have killed their whole show.
Well, and so many people from the original producers on Broadway to the people who made the movie to the governors and legislators in the South when this thing went on tour for the first time, this song became the sticking point of people saying, you can do your show, just take this song out. And at every step of the way, mostly it was Oscar Hammerstein, but both of them, he was the one that said, no, if the song is taken out of the show, we will not do the show. So they were willing to put their money where their mouth was.
They were. And again, also keep in mind, this is post-war. Anti-communism was out there. And a lot of the Southerners, their idea was, well, it's on communism. And they're like, the communists aren't going to like this either. So, no, it's not communism.
Yeah.
And so I think that song and all of the controversy and everything that went around it at the time, I think that's one of the most wonderful legacies that this show has. And then my last, what really worked, when the filters aren't on, it's beautifully filmed.
Oh, you can just imagine the movie that this could have been. Well, where it was filmed was Kauai, the island on the Hawaiian Islands, where they filmed the first Jurassic Park and Lost. I mean, it's your go-to tropical paradise,
and it's beautiful, which is why he thought it would look unreal because but it's really, really, really that beautiful.
Yeah.
So, as I said earlier, James Michener, this really started his career once he got 1% off of the show. all the earnings, and that enabled him to quit his day job. And he became a writer, and he wrote, there's several movies, The Bridges at Toko Ri, Sayonara, which is a movie with Marlon Brando, which, not great. Donovan's Reef with John Wayne, Hawaii, a lot of epics. He did these things. Also, Centennial, which was a TV miniseries back in the day.
Yep. Space,
also a miniseries.
Hawaii was the book that was on my dad's coffee table for the longest time.
My dad had that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as I said, he was stationed out there so that was very dear to his heart. Fun fact, and you mentioned this earlier before we started recording, is that he wrote the storyline for Dynasty, the TV show.
Now, did he write it as a short story that then they took,
I can't tell you that.
Work with
I
the
don't
TV
know that.
producers to set this whole
I don't know that, but I'm sure he got paid for it,
really,
and that's where he was.
He's responsible for Crystal Carrington and Alexis Colby.
That's okay. That's okay, dude. It's America. It's America.
So from fighting the Japanese in the South Pacific to a cat fight in the swimming pool, he could do it all, apparently.
Yeah, James Michener. So, final diagnosis.
My final diagnosis on South Pacific is see it. There's what is good about it will get you through some of the things that don't work. It didn't age particularly well in every aspect, especially those goddamn color filters on the, it's such a shame. It's such a waste. But you're right. Mitzi Gaynor is adorable. I really always kind of thought of her as some kind of B-list player. I mean, she never had, she was the lead in a couple of musicals, but none that have kind of made it as classics in the way that South Pacific had. And because of that, I just assumed that, they didn't get anyone really very good for this one. And I just loved her. And I'm really sad that she didn't have that I can't see much more of her, because I think she was just, she's a big reason to see this. As you say, the score is beautiful. Every song is a winner except for Happy Talk. That one needs to die in a fire, but everything else works really, really well. And the message is still really important. This is another one where, it did come back to Broadway like 3 years ago. Probably needs to come back sometime in the next couple of years, just so we can all be reminded yet again.
My final diagnosis is similar. I think in this season where we're talking about things that we would recommend, I recommend seeing this. It's a classic. Lots of things reference South Pacific.
Including the Blue Lagoon, apparently.
And Jurassic Park, but if only they'd used filters. But I think that, as I said, the message is huge and extremely timely right now. There's a lot to get past, but I agree. I think it's worth it. And it is part of American history. It's pure American. I mean, just the whole attitude and point of view. And I think that, kudos to Rodgers and Hammerstein for doing this and feeling strongly enough. And so, yes, I recommend it. There's a lot to get past, but there's a lot to like about it. So that is our take on South Pacific. Happy 60th.
And you can find us on Facebook. You can find us on Twitter. You can find us wherever you listen to podcasts. And if nothing else, you can always visit us at www.poperationroom.com. We'll see you next week.
You've been listening to Popperation with Eric and Stacey, the podcast that dissects popular culture one bloody organ at a time. Subscribe today on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, YouTube, and any other podcast listening site or app. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook at Popperation Room. Check out our website at poperationroom.com for all of the podcasts, our blog, swag, and games. Until next time, when we're back in the scrubs.
Talk about things you like to do. You got to have a dream. If you don't have a dream,
I've already blocked it out.
How you gonna make the dream come true?